Chris Burgess just burned Utah and he's heading back to BYU. Let's discuss on today's Locked On Utes and Locked On Cougars crossover.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes and Locked On Cougars your first listens every single day. We are available on all platforms, including YouTube and wherever you may get your podcast. If this is your first time listening to either of our shows, make sure you like and subscribe. We love interacting with all of you in the YouTube comments as well as on social media, where you can follow our shows on X. Today's episode of Locked On Utes and Locked On Cougars is brought to you by Monopoly Go. Game off. We've got to talk more about Monopoly Go. This fast-paced game lets you team up with friends for tournaments to unlock awesome prizes like unique stickers for trading, cool playing pieces, and hilarious emojis for taunting friends. So download Monopoly Go now free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. My name is JT Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. Excited to be joined by Jake Hatch of Locked On Cougars. And Jake, this is a wild day for both Utah and BYU. It was just a few years ago that Chris Burgess left BYU to join Craig Smith's staff at Utah. And now we see the former BYU assistant coming back to BYU to join Kevin Young's staff. How do we get to this point?
Well, frankly, I'm as stunned as anybody because after Mark Pope ultimately left for Kentucky, BYU, anybody who is a Utah or BYU fan knows that BYU's got a relatively short list of candidates for that job. They've got to be active members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And that's just a simple fact of the matter. And Chris Burgess was on that short list. I had a very strong understanding that he had initial discussions with BYU brass about the job potentially, but they were honed in on Kevin Young, who they ultimately hired, and they got their guy. But here's the thing, JT, I'll just say this right at the outset. Money talks, and it goes in all facets of life. Chris was a guy that was making a very healthy living at Utah. I think the report was $285,000 a year, and that's a great amount of money to make as the lead assistant on a very high-level Power 6 staff. But I've got to believe the BYU had to up the ante a little bit to incentivize him to come back south, especially considering he's working for a guy who is now younger than him as the head coach of BYU.
Yeah, it's a stunning turn of events. It's not one that we really saw coming, especially like you said, like he's on the short list. So like doesn't get it. You don't think like, oh, he didn't get it or whatever happened. And now he's going to go over there and be the assistant, work for a guy who got it over him or whatever might've played out. Like those are the kind of things that are absolutely stunning. And look, it's been a tough offseason for Utah basketball so far. We're going to talk about some of the transfer portal things in our second segment, but Utah has lost Davon Smith now. They lost Brandon Carlson. And now you lose your lead assistant in your first year going into the Big 12 when it was a really disappointing year that you did not end up making the NCAA tournament. So this is a really tough blow for any positive momentum that Utah basketball had. You got a little bit with adding Mason Madsen, the twin brothers, are kind of fun things there, but it's not Utah basketball, not in a great place right now. How do you feel about the state of BYU basketball now that you've hired a strong assistant, you're putting together a staff, you got some transfers coming in? Post the Mark Pope era, how do you feel like the Kevin Young era is getting off to a start?
Well, just over 2 weeks into it, I'm not sure that you could have envisioned anything going any better for Kevin Young, frankly. All he's done is he's injected life into this program after their head coach, who led him to a surprising finish in the Big 12 this year, bolted for his dream job at Kentucky. But he's come in, he's hired Brandon Dunson as one of his assistants from Stanford, who has been a really, really nice revelation in terms of his recruiting ability. Chris Burgess now brings his ability and his understanding of how BYU operates from having worked at BYU for the 3 seasons before leaving for Utah. So there's a lot going well on the BYU front, and Kevin Young, I'm not sure that he can do any wrong right now for BYU fans. He's been everything they've wanted and then some. And the crazy thing is he spent the majority of the past 2 weeks, oh, by the way, being the associate head coach of the Phoenix Suns during their short run in the NBA playoffs. Yeah, they got swept. I get that, but he was trying to balance both jobs. He's offered multiple 4- and 5-star talents in that time. Yeah, it's all systems go, and all systems are green light right now if you're a BYU fan.
I can't imagine trying to balance both, like it being in an NBA playoff series and then trying to run like even just one sounds like such a daunting task. So I already have so much respect for him trying to take on both these things at the same time. And, it seems like, look, obviously you lose some guys in the portal, but you've also got some guys to come back. Like, I mean, do you feel like BYU is going to be just as good, maybe even better than they were this past year? How do you feel about them as it pertains to the 24 season?
They've got a chance. Now, I say that because you mentioned they got Dallin Hall and Richie Saunders to return. Those are two huge guys that were going into the portal that had offers from a number of programs around the country that would have loved to have had them inside the program. Most notably, Richie Saunders making that visit to Kentucky to meet with Mark Pope and ultimately deciding to return to BYU. Their returns, and obviously you've lost Ali Khalifa, Spencer Johnson, and Jackson Robinson's situation. I still believe he's going to go to the NBA, but that's still pending a little bit. The nice majority of that roster is returning. That was a big reason why BYU made that run in that 5th place finish in the Big 12 this year. So yeah, you had the right pieces around them, and BYU's working very hard to do just that, trying to find a couple of big men to replace Ali Khalifa as well as Atiki Ali Atiki. But if you find the right combination of guys to kind of inject into this program, and then essentially don't screw it up too much if you're Kevin Young, just kind of let things ride a little bit here. Yeah, there's no reason to believe that BYU couldn't be better next year than they were this past season, which was an absolutely incredible season, all things considered.
Yeah, it feels like BYU is off to a strong, just, post Mark Pope era. Good recruiting so far. And Kevin Young is a very accomplished coach. Like, you look at where he's gone, where he's done, being a lead assistant in the NBA, especially a team like the Suns who have had a lot of success. Like, that is a really strong feat. It's crazy to think he only has 1 year of college experience, basically going all the way back to the Utah Valley days. And, I guess it's a testament to his coaching and the system he has in place there. I think it was understandably so. Like, when he was hired, like, how is this team going to recruit? And so far it's gone well. And that's where it's been the opposite for Utah. You look at a guy in Craig Smith, who's done a great job recruiting at Utah State, developed talent. And even Utah, got some players in where you like and encourage. I mean, the Davon Smith one was such a great ad that now he's gone and going to be going to another program. Like, and Utah, we just talked about BYU being in a maybe even a better place. Utah is there's no way you can say that they're in a worse spot than they were when they ended the season. Lost all of their top players. It's great to get Gabe Madsen back. That's the one. But, with how good Smith was playing and Carlson and even a guy in Ben Carlson, even a depth piece where it's like, it's just good to have continuity back. Like, he's now gone. And I think it's understandable that Utah men's basketball fans are really worried about the future of this program as they're about to enter the toughest conference, basically.
Well, okay, and let me say this. Craig Smith has proven that he can be a very successful head coach. You mentioned he's done it at every stop before arriving at Utah. And the NIT run that Utah enjoyed this year, that the thought was, okay, you bring some of those pieces back, you can obviously parlay that potentially into the NCAA tournament this next year. Well, guess what? It has not gone to plan at all. 2 assistants gone. Your top player that potentially could have returned next year in Davon Smith bolts and obviously goes to what I believe is one of the highest bidders with regards to NIL. And here's the deal. It's not looking great for Utah, but there is still time for Craig Smith to put the pieces back together. So let me say that to Utah fans. Don't be burning the boat right now and say, you know what, it's all lost. It doesn't look pretty right now, but there is an opportunity still. There's still time for Craig Smith to right the ship. But the problem is, it's going to take some monumental efforts to go out there in the portal in particular and find talent to bring in. And also, you got to replace 2 assistants, and one of which was an alum of the university, a beloved alum in Chris Burgess. He spurns you to go to your arch rival BYU. That is not a good look in terms of trying to hire an assistant coach. So, yes, it doesn't look great for Utah. There is time to get it right, but Craig Smith, he's going to have to kind of snake and walk a fine line here if he really wants to keep things on a positive trajectory, because it really feels like it's kind of plateaued or maybe going down a little bit.
It does feel that way. And I do like that you highlighted the positives of Craig Smith as a coach. I do believe I think he's a good coach. But it's the portal. I mean, that's where so much of this is who you can get and build and bring on your roster. And I mean, Smith's probably the best player they've been able to add in the portal era. Madsen would be obviously Gabe Madsen, maybe another guy you can make the argument between the two of them. Madsen, obviously, for the career. But I mean, it's just when you had a guy like Smith who's setting Pac-12 triple-double records and is at the point guard spot too. So such a dynamic position, as important as shooting is too. Like, it's just, yeah, it's not great right now. And, we've been talking about the portal here a little bit. Want to talk about how each side, being Utah and BYU, is currently doing in the portal. We'll be discussing that in one moment. But first, want to talk to you about the sponsor of our Locked On Utes and Locked On Cougars crossover in our friends at eBay Motors. With eBay Motors, passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning formula is exactly what you need for championships and to keep your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Jake, the transfer portal has giveth and taken for both Utah and BYU. You know, starting out for Utah, we already talked about guys like Smith, right, who have now exited the program. That has to be by far Utah's biggest loss. You lose a guy like Will Exact, who got hurt, and people were thought he had a bright future. I'm still surprised he entered the portal, and he hasn't committed anymore, so maybe that's one there's a chance he could come back, but he's only shown flashes too, so it's not like you're going to get Will Exact back and be like, oh yeah, that changes things. That's an added 5 wins to Utah's total. You can't say that about a guy who hasn't done a ton. Tarlock is another guy who left. That one's okay. Raleigh departing. Utah fans seem to have a love-hate relationship with Raleigh, but he was a steady presence, and he's a guy that essentially, like, he's better than what's currently on this roster right now if you're Utah too. So that's a tough one. You've added guys like a Dawes, who he had a good year at Rice as just a freshman, averaged 6 points, 4 rebounds a game, but it's not like he's going to come in and it's just hard to project him transforming this Utah roster. Mason Madsen is a good shooter coming over from Boston College. Him and Gabe, I'm excited to see what the twins can do together, as Mason shot 37% from 3 last year. And then you get Keller, the 6'10" big, coming over from Wake Forest. But none of those like really make you jump out of your seat. Like, oh man, what a unreal addition. Like, this is one of the stars of this Utah program. Like, Gabe is right now probably Utah's projected leading scorer. And I mean, he's a great shooter, but it's hard to be like, oh yeah, we're going to put the offense on his shoulders and that's going to work out great in the Big 12. Like, Utah still has a lot of work they need to do to add on to their roster, Jake.
Well, here's the thing. If Gabe Madsen plays like he did against Houston last year, and it came in a loss, but if he plays like he did against Houston every game, well, guess what? Utah will be just fine, because when he's on, he's lights out. And we'll see what his brother can obviously add to that mix. But you're right. The transfer portal, it's such a finicky thing out there, because the funny thing about it is BYU has not really added a ton from the portal. But the funny thing is a lot of times the best additions are the retention guys. And what I mean by that is Dallin Hall, what I believe could end up with his career being an all Big 12 type performer, for him to come back to BYU, because I had heard very strong indications that he was intent on leaving and pursuing the biggest NIL check he possibly could get, even if Mark Pope didn't leave the BYU basketball program. He just wanted to go out there and see what he could get on the open market. And from what I understand, there were some pretty heavy hitters that were offering him pretty big money. Kevin Young got in his ear, sat down with him, sold him on his vision for the BYU basketball program, and retains him. Similar type situation to Richie Saunders. I think Richie was an easier sell to return to BYU, because I think he always wanted to be in Provo, and he's been in kind of a really good player that's really kind of transformed as time has gone on during his time with the Cougars. So the thing about it is that Utah has been hurt by the portal. There's no doubt about that. I said it a little bit earlier. There's still time to correct that and obviously bring in some talent. And BYU right now, all they're really looking at in terms of the portal right now is essentially they want to inject the right type of guys. Now, they got to find a couple of big men, because right now Fousseyni Traore is your only big man on that roster. And when Foose is your big man at 6'5", I love Foose to death, but he is 6'5". He's got 7'1" wingspan, but it's just, you got to find a legit 7-footer, if like 6'10", 6'11", something like that. I know that Ali Khalifa was a slow, methodical, kind of plodding player, but he was incredible with his passing, and you can't teach 6'11", 270 pounds, whatever he weighed. So you got to find some guys like that. So right now, BYU, the best thing for them in the transfer portal has been the guys that they've retained from the portal, whereas Utah, they've had their best players exit via graduation, and more in particular via the portal. There's time for both of them to kind of get things going, but it's a very different situation where Utah needs an injection of talent. There's just no if, and, or but about it. BYU is just trying to kind of bolster this roster and really make sure that it continues doing what it was doing last year.
Yeah, I'm a huge Foose fan. I'm glad you brought him up. He actually played AAU ball with my brother back in high school, so I got an early look to see what he could do. And man, he was impressive. And you could see just kind of like the strength of the size, and it's been fun to watch him kind of grow and go on to have this success at BYU. But you mentioned an interesting thing. Both these teams have work to still do in the portal, and so it's like, okay, then do you have the faith in the coaches to do that? As it pertains to Craig Smith, I'd say it's up in the air. Obviously, I'd probably lean towards no. I don't have faith that he is able to get the talent needed in the portal for Utah to get to where they want to be in the Big 12, which I think is fair. Kevin Young's off to a good start, but we already talked earlier about his lack of college experience. How much confidence do you have in him as a recruiter going forward?
Well, so far, so good, honestly, because the fact, like I said, that the Dallin Hall, he was just intent on leaving BYU and going to the highest bidder. Kevin Young got in the room with him and essentially said, this is what we're going to do. This is what we're looking at. And Dallin Hall said, okay, I'm in. I'm coming back to BYU. I'm sure there was an improved NIL number. I will absolutely acknowledge that. BYU's collective, the Royal Blue Collective, has been stepping up to the plate in a big way, NIL-wise, which I know is a big factor in all of this. But I think Kevin Young, the biggest ace up his sleeve in recruiting is Chris Burgess. Bringing Burgess in is just a home run because Chris knows the scene in terms of high school recruiting in this state, the Intermountain West, and even nationwide. But more importantly, he knows what it takes to recruit to BYU. He knows what a quote-unquote BYU guy is, and he will be able to help Kevin Young say, okay, that kid's got a lot of talent, but he will not make it at BYU. And I know that sounds like a really weird thing to say, but any Utah fan or BYU fan within the sound of our voices watching and or listening to this knows exactly what I'm talking about. They got to be able to abide by the honor code. They got to be able to obviously hack it academically in Provo. So the bigger thing is I think Chris Burgess and his understanding of what works and what doesn't work at BYU will absolutely be pivotal to Kevin Young's success. Yes, it's early on, but he's done a really good job. Having Chris Burgess now to really kind of help him along the way, that's a major, major boost for BYU recruiting-wise.
We got a long time until Utah and BYU face off, not once, but twice this year, which will be a nice welcome change as they're in the same conference come the 2024-2025 college basketball season.
Since we've seen this. It's been a long time since we have the home and home series, and obviously counts for all the marbles now in the Big 12 conference. I am super excited about that. I'll just inject that right now.
Yeah, I'm super excited too, but I got to be honest. I'm feeling right now early. If we had to predict today, like who's going to win those games, I would say BYU right now is a better team. That doesn't mean Utah can't win some of those games. There's still a lot of work to go in the transfer portal, but it's hard not to feel like BYU will probably has the edge over Utah and should finish higher than them in the standings based on the initial work that has played out in what is still a lengthy college offseason to go.
Well, and that's the thing about it is the media poll will come out this fall, and I will obviously with 16 teams in the conference, I would imagine BYU is going to be top half of the conference at minimum. Utah's probably going to be, I think, somewhere around that 10 to 14 mark in my mind with regards to where they're picked. But a lot of perceptions can change because, as you mentioned, it's still a very, very long time in this offseason to go. Obviously, the portal closed up May 1st. That obviously is a big deal because all you had to do is go into the portal. Not all the guys had to come out of the portal at that point. So you still have the opportunity to go out and inject that talent into the program. Who does Craig Smith replace? Chris Burgess and who was the other assistant? That's just skipping my mind.
Slocum, I believe, went to Washington.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, you're right. That's what it was. And so you had to replace those two assistants. And those can change perceptions of people's minds who vote on such things. But we'll see how it goes. Right now, yeah, it does look like BYU has the upper hand in the rivalry right now. But that's on paper. We all know that this is played out on the court. And guess what happened last year? Utah beat BYU in Salt Lake City. I was there. I saw it with my own eyes. And Utah played outside their minds. It was an awesome game for Utah. So, yes, I get the Utah fans are probably a little down and out about the basketball program right now and the trajectory and where it's going with Craig Smith, and probably we're trying to beg Mark Harlan to step in and do something about it. You know what? Let it ride for a little bit. Yes. Don't be too hasty on making these proclaiming that it's all doom and gloom around Utah. I get it doesn't feel good right now, but there is still a long way to go before the hardwood really before the ball gets on the hardwood this fall. And that's when it really matters. That's when perceptions really get changed, because here's the thing. BYU was picked 13th out of 14 teams last year in the Big 12. And trust me, I was right there saying, yeah, that's a pretty good spot for BYU to be picked. They start off the season extremely well. And I'm like, okay, is this a little bit of a fluky start for BYU? Well, guess what? All season long, they continue to prove it and prove it and prove it time and again. And that is the opportunity that exists for Utah. And obviously BYU is going to have to back up a 5th place finish this year with potentially trying to finish even higher than that. Can they go to 4th, 2nd, 3rd? Can they challenge for conference supremacy? That's kind of the trajectory these two programs are on. But the nice part is it's all ahead of them rather than behind them.
And Coach Smith, to your point, has earned the opportunity for the ascension. It was still a step in the right direction last year for Utah. They just missed out on the tournament. They were one of the last, probably maybe weren't one of the last 8 out, but maybe last 12 to miss out on the tournament. And you look back at the NIT success, so he deserves the opportunity to have too. Jake, don't you just also love how crazy and unpredictable college basketball is? Because I'm not using this to take a shot at BYU. I'm genuinely not. But like, if you would have told me before the year that LeBron's former high school coach would be the one who would knock BYU out of the tournament, like that's just like Keith Dambrod doing that. Like that, the former Akron coach that was where my dad used to be at. So I'm very familiar with Coach Dambrod too. Like that's what makes just this sport so fun and crazy, and why the tournament is so much fun too. And at some point, I do hope we get like Utah BYU in the NCAA tournament, like we got Duke UNC, because I just feel like that would be something that would be absolutely incredible.
Well, okay, here's the thing. Utah, you got to figure out how to win on the road. If Utah could have won 3, maybe 4 games in Pac-12 play on the road, I would have absolutely said they're an NCAA tournament team. The fact that they could play as well as they did at home in the Huntsman Center and play as awful as they did on the road traditionally, and trust me, BYU fans are going to make them mad. I watch both BYU and Utah games as part of my job in radio. I've got to watch both of them. Utah's disparity between home and road was just atrocious. And what I mean by that is you cannot play any worse on the road than Utah did this past season. You got to figure something out on that front. You continue to do what you do at home, that's great. And BYU, the nice part was they kind of proved it. They could go on the road and win big games. They went to Allen Fieldhouse and beat Kansas in their home gym. 17 times in Bill Self's tenure, Kansas had lost on their home court. BYU made it 18. That is an impressive run because they had won 330 some odd games outside of those 17 losses. So incredible stuff. And the nice part is you have that opportunity to go and kind of change that perception of yourself if you're Utah, and obviously you got to uphold it if you're BYU. But hey, we got months to go here, and obviously it'll be a fun time. And we got college football upcoming before that. It's fun to have these two rivals in the same conference. And I, for one, JT, if we had the opportunity to have them play each other in the big dance, I'd be all about it.
It'd be a blast. Really quick, you were talking about Kansas, and I was like, man, that's crazy. They've only lost 17 home games. It's great that Utah doesn't have to play them. Oh, wait, never mind.
Hold on.
Yeah. Oh crap. We'll see how that goes there. But it's going to be wild to see how these two rosters shake out too. And we have some football roster shakeout news. Want to dive in one moment. But first, I want to talk to you guys about one of the sponsors of our episode today, our friends at Monopoly Go. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. You already talked about that. But there's just so much good stuff in this game. I mean, in Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for timed tournaments where you work together to build each other's boards. That means you win together, and the more awesome prizes you can then unlock. And there's so much to get. You can get unique stickers. You can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes. They have cool new playing pieces for travel boards with hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges, a ton including their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or a robot machine. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multiplayers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So go get it off the bench and go download it now on the free Google Play or App Store. Game on with Monopoly Go. Jake, back in the day, you and I were calling high school football games together, and we would often make the trips out to Skyridge High School, who's been pretty good the last few years. Part of the reason is McKay Hillstead, a really dynamic high school quarterback who, and when I say dynamic, I mean dynamic. I mean, the way he would make high school defenders look in the open field when he would take off and scramble is just silly. He went to Utah State, did some really nice things there, then decided to enter the transfer portal. Threw some interceptions too, but he was only a freshman. A lot of excitement about what Hillstead could become. Takes a visit to Utah, but does end up committing to BYU. And this is a guy that Utah offered, but he decided to become a BYU Cougar. And this feels like a nice get for BYU because he's a guy, Hillstead, who would have had a shot at the starting job next fall.
Yeah, he'll obviously come in expecting to compete for playing time, and there's no reason to think that he can't. Here's the thing about this, and I'll speak from this on the BYU perspective. I think Utah had the same thought process. You and I watched McKay Hillstead in high school. I had the funny thing is I called his very first start in high school. He's a sophomore at Skyridge High School, and if he weighed more than 150 pounds that season, I would be absolutely floored. But the thing about it is, he got out there, and as you mentioned, he just made dudes look silly. The thing about it, you'd think a guy had him dead to rights in the backfield. He'd make one move, he's off to the races, and it's a 50-yard gain and a touchdown. It felt like more often than not during his time at Skyridge High School. The biggest concern about him is he's 5'10", and he weighed probably $170, $175 coming out of high school. Just not the measurables that Power 4 programs like BYU and Utah want in their quarterbacks. Well, what does he do? He goes to Utah State. The Aggies give him a chance. As you mentioned, he showed some flashes of some absolute brilliance. He had a 400-yard game and 4 touchdowns against James Madison, which was a really good performance because JMU is a very, very stout defensive team, and he showed what he's capable of. I believe that the staffs of both BYU and Utah said, okay, he proved he can do it at this level. Now, I know that Utah State is at the G5 level and BYU and Utah are at the Power 4 level, but still, he showed he could play. He was a bona fide college quarterback. Well, guess what? Then he goes in the transfer portal, and you're like, yeah, come on and check it out. And it's a little closer to home for him. He grew up in Springville, Utah, played at Skyridge and Lehigh, and he went as close to home as he possibly could, playing in Provo, obviously. So, the thing is, I think both staffs were not wrong initially in saying, hey, it's not going to work out because you're just not what we're looking for. But when you go and prove that you have the goods at the Division I level, well, guess what? That's when the interest is reignited, and BYU fortunately gets the win in the end by bringing him in.
Yeah, it was a crazy process to follow from where he came. And then props to him, like you said, for proving those schools wrong and earning this chance to have an opportunity for compete for the jobs there. So gonna be fun to see what he can do at BYU. Maybe he'll be playing Utah soon too, Jake.
And that's the thing about that. That's a good point, is that he could be playing as soon as this year, just to see how the quarterback situation in Provo plays out. But the other thing about this is people think that this is just BYU scooping up a guy who's looking for a place to play. That's not true. He had offers around the country, and other Big 12 programs were interested in him and giving him offers besides Utah and BYU. This was a guy that when you prove what you can do at the G5 level and you have enough of a resume, then you have 4 years of eligibility remaining, they're going to be programs saying, yeah, we want you to come and play in our program. So this is not a local kid wanting to stay home and just getting scooped up by a local program. He was a bona fide transfer portal target, and BYU is fortunate to pick him up. And I really do think he's going to compete for playing time this year. If Jake Retzloff and or Gary Bohannon, who are kind of battling for that number 1 job in Provo, either one of them or both of them falter, it would not surprise me to see McKay Hillstead injected into this BYU lineup. He's got the speed, the athleticism, and he's proven he's got the arm as well to be able to be an effective quarterback at the FBS level. And I think BYU fans are going to be excited to have him on their sideline.
It definitely should be. Be fun to see if he can win the job, and it's going to be a lot of fun when these two teams, being Utah and BYU, face off in football, and eventually when we get to basketball season 2. Jake, always fun doing these crossovers with you.
Hey, anytime you need me, JT, I always love chatting with you, my friend.
Always a great time. We hope you guys enjoyed this Locked On Utes and Locked On Cougars crossover. We'll be back with you soon, bringing more great Utah and BYU content.